In the quiet and eerie countryside of Bavaria, nestled deep within the forest, the Hinterkaifeck farm sat in a desolate and isolated corner of the world. It was the spring of 1922, and a powerful storm howled across the vast, empty land, shaking the old wooden walls of the farmhouse. The winds howled as if they, too, were warning of an impending disaster. The family that lived there, Andreas Gruber, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, her 2 children, and the maid Maria, had grown accustomed to the solitude. For years, they had lived in the remote house, working the fields and raising cattle. But things had started to change, creeping into their peaceful existence like a shadow. Andreas had begun hearing strange noises coming from the attic, scratching, whispers, and faint footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the sounds grew more distinct, more deliberate, as if something or someone was living in the shadows of their home. Items began disappearing. Tools, farm equipment, even small trinkets. A newspaper was found on their porch one morning, though they had never subscribed to it. The unease settled over the family like a fog that refused to lift. Maria, the maid, was the first to crack. She claimed the house was cursed. "I hear footsteps at night. I feel watched," she said, her voice trembling. And so she left, too afraid to stay another night. But even after she departed, the eerie disturbances continued. Strange, barefoot footprints appeared in the snow, leading away from the nearby forest toward the house. But there were no tracks heading back. Whoever or whatever had come to the farm had never left. When the family's new maid arrived days later, she was greeted by an unsettling silence. The barn was strangely still. The animals didn't stir. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But as she walked through the barn, she caught sight of something in the corner. Something she would never forget. The bodies of the family were piled in gruesome heaps, each one brutally murdered, blood splattered across the cold wooden floor. The horror of the killings was made even more terrifying by the eerie calm that surrounded the discovery. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of the killer. It was as if death had quietly entered the house, taken its toll, and then simply disappeared. The youngest, little Kazilia, was found with clumps of hair ripped from her scalp, evidence that she had fought, that she had been awake, that she had suffered. Her death was far more personal, far more brutal than the others. But what was most chilling of all was the realization that the killer had not fled. Numbered he had stayed. Neighbors later reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney and food missing from the kitchen. The killer, or killers, had lived in the house, among the dead. For days, they ate the family's food, slept in their beds, and walked the same halls as if the murder had never occurred. When investigators finally arrived, they found nothing but the dead bodies and the lingering smell of death. No clues, no answers. The trail had gone cold. Over time, the case faded from the public eye, but it never truly disappeared. Locals still speak of the mysterious farm, whispering about what really happened. Some claim it was a drifter, a murderer who simply vanished into the night. Others suggest something darker, an ancient force that possessed the minds of the Gruber family, driving them to kill each other in a gruesome ritual of death. The farm was eventually demolished, but the land where it once stood remains untouched. No one dares build on it. And if you listen closely, the whispers of the past are said to still linger in the air, a chilling reminder of the terrible secrets that may never be uncovered. On the outskirts of Kaimuki, a small neighborhood in Honolulu, stood a seemingly ordinary house. Its modest exterior belied the horrors that festered inside. The house had long been known among locals to be cursed. It was said to be inhabited by a kasha, a malevolent demon that thrived on fear, feeding on the misery of those who dared live within its walls. The story of the house began when a family, hoping for a fresh start, moved in. They were unaware of the house's sinister history, unaware of the ancient evil that had lain dormant for decades. At first, everything seemed normal. But soon, strange events began to unfold. It started with small, unsettling occurrences. Doors that would open by themselves, despite being securely locked. The sound of whispers in the walls, as though voices from another time were trapped within. The family dismissed these as oddities, not yet realizing the malevolent force that was growing stronger with each passing day. But then, the activity escalated. Objects would fly off shelves, crashing to the ground with a deafening clatter. At night, the family would wake to a feeling of suffocation, as cold, invisible hands tightened around their throats, squeezing the life out of them. In the darkness, a hulking figure would appear in doorways, tall, dark, and watching, its eyes glowing with a cold, empty malevolence. One night, the terror reached a peak when the mother of the family called the police, screaming that her children were under attack. Officers arrived at the house to find the children being flung across the room, their bodies tossed like rag dolls by unseen forces. The officers could do nothing but watch in horror, frozen in fear. They fled the house in panic, leaving the family to fend for themselves. Over the years, the house claimed more victims. Tenants moved in, hoping to start anew, but they too would flee in terror. Some left in the dead of night, never to speak of what they had seen. Others were found with bruises, scratches, and blood-soaked clothes, their eyes wide with terror, unable to explain what had happened to them. Some disappeared altogether. The haunting of the Kaimuki house became a local legend, a terrifying story passed from generation to generation. No one could explain what was happening within those walls. But one thing was certain. No one who had entered the house had ever left unchanged. The demon, this kasha, was hungry, and it was always waiting for its next victim. The fire that consumed the Sodder family home on Christmas Eve of 1945 was a tragedy that seemed almost too cruel to be real. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their children, had narrowly escaped the flames, their home engulfed in a blazing inferno. But 5 of their children that were inside the house, had vanished. The fire had burned through the night, consuming everything in its path. Yet when the embers cooled, there were no remains, no bones, no traces of their existence. It was as though they had simply disappeared into thin air. George desperately tried to save them. He grabbed his ladder, but it was gone. Vanished. His trucks, which should have been working, were mysteriously disabled. The fire raged on, growing hotter, faster. When the firemen arrived, they found nothing. No bodies. No traces of the children who had been trapped in the house. Theories about the fire's cause quickly arose. Some said it was an accident, a terrible tragedy that no one could have predicted. But as the investigation unfolded, bizarre details began to surface. The fire had burned so hot that no remains had been left behind. Yet despite this, there were no signs of the children's bodies. No bones, no fragments, not even traces of their presence. As the weeks passed, the Sodders became obsessed with finding their children. They searched for clues, followed every lead, but nothing ever came of it. Theories ran rampant. Some speculated that it was the work of the mob, seeking revenge on George for his refusal to pay a ransom. Others suggested an elaborate kidnapping, or that the children had been taken by someone who knew exactly what had happened. Then came the letters. One day, George and Jenny received a strange photograph in the mail. It was a photo of a young man who looked eerily familiar. The message read, "Your boys are alive." Who had sent the letter? And if the children were still alive, where were they? The Sodders followed every lead, traveled across the country, and spent years searching for any trace of their missing children. But each road led to a dead end, and each lead faded into silence. To this day, the case remains one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. Were the children taken? Did they survive the fire somehow? Or was there something even darker at play? The Sodders' relentless search for answers never ceased. Even after their deaths, their story remained unsolved, and the question of what happened to the 5 children of the Sodder family haunts their descendants to this day. In the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on an expedition into the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. They were young, well-prepared, and full of optimism. Their goal was to reach the peak of Otorten, but what they encountered instead was something far more horrifying than anything they could have imagined. Days passed without incident, but when the hikers failed to return to their base camp, a search party was sent out. What they discovered was beyond comprehension. The campsite was found abandoned, but there were signs of a struggle. Tents were slashed open from the inside, as if the hikers had been trying to escape in a panic. The hikers' belongings were scattered, and some of them were found half-dressed, their bodies frozen in the frigid night air. The bodies of the hikers were found in various states of undress, some with severe internal injuries, broken ribs, crushed skulls. One woman's tongue had been removed. Others had strange burns and radiation on their clothes. But the most disturbing detail was the hikers' journals. The entries told a different story, one of terror. Some of the hikers described strange, unsettling feelings of being watched. Others claimed that they had felt hunted, that something was stalking them in the mountains. What had happened to them? What had caused them to flee in the dead of night, half-dressed, into the freezing wilderness? Several theories were proposed to explain the tragedy. Some speculated that the hikers had stumbled upon a secret Soviet military test or a hidden military installation and were killed to cover it up. Others suggested that they had encountered extraterrestrial forces or even a wild animal attack that went horribly wrong. Some locals spoke of an ancient curse that haunted the mountains, a force so powerful and so old that it could drive people to madness. Whatever the truth may be, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains an enigma, one that has captured the imagination of conspiracy theorists, adventurers, and horror enthusiasts for decades. Some mysteries, it seems, were never meant to be solved. Some questions should remain unanswered, because the answers may be far too terrifying to confront.